Good afternoon. I'm Natalie St. Ange. Welcome to a live debate between the candidates for President and Executive Vice President for Marquette University Student Government. The MUSG elections for the upcoming year will be held on March 28th, and tonight we hope to help you make an informed decision. Whoever is elected will be responsible for leading the Student Senate, helping allocate funds for student organizations, and representing the student voice to top university administration. The President and Executive Vice President run as a ticket. One ticket is Peter Feider for President and Faiza Dahlia for Executive Vice President. Feider is in his fourth year of a 5-year program and a President pro tempore for the MUSG Senate. He has worked on initiatives to solidify Marquette's relationships with Milwaukee companies for the purpose of promoting student internship opportunities. Dahlia is also in her fourth year of a 5-year program. She is the current president of the Muslim Student Association and co-founder of the Interfaith Coordinating Team. She has worked on an interfaith initiative, including working closely with campus ministry to build a stronger and more inclusive community amongst all minority, multicultural, and multi-faith groups. On the other ticket is Sarah Manji, who's running for president, and Dan Brophy for executive vice president. Manji is a junior and is currently the outreach vice president for MUSG. She's chair of the Student Organizations Committee, as well as the Diversity, Inclusion, and Social Justice Committee. She has worked on initiatives regarding food insecurity, parking, and first-generation students. Brophy is also a junior. He's currently the legislative vice president for MUSG and has sat on the MUSG Budget Committee. He has worked on numerous initiatives relating to sexual health education, tuition, and financial aid transparency, and student organization funding processes in MUSG. Now let's go to our moderator for tonight's debate. Sydney Sizon is the managing editor of the Tribune for the Marquette Wire. Sydney?
Welcome to the 2019 MUSG Presidential and Executive Vice Presidential Debate. I'm your moderator, Sydney Sizon. I extend a welcome to our candidates who are all here today. On one ticket, we have Sarah Manji for President and Dan Brophy for Executive Vice President. On the other ticket, we have Peter Feider for President and Faiza Dahlia for Executive Vice President. Thank you all for being here. I will now go through the rules for the debate. Each ticket will have 2 minutes to answer a question. When you hear this sound, that means that you have 10 seconds to wrap it up. And when you hear this sound, that means that your time is up and I will move on to the next question. We flipped a coin before the debate to decide who will provide their opening statement first. Sarah and Dan won the coin toss and therefore will give their opening statement first. We will switch back and forth as to who answers questions first. Does each ticket understand the rules? Awesome, we will get started. So Sarah and Dan, please begin by giving your opening statement.
Thanks, Sydney. So before we continue, Dan and I wanted to acknowledge the indigenous land that Marquette is situated on. Marquette resides on the lands of the Menominee, Chippewa, Potawatomi, Ojibwe, and Ho-Chunk nations, and we want to recognize their historic stewardship of these lands. As Dan and I considered running for Marquette University Student Government President and Executive Vice President, there were a couple of questions that ran through our head. Who is Marquette changing for? Who isn't Marquette serving? And what is MUSG missing? We weren't satisfied with the answers to these questions. For students like me at Marquette, our stories and our voices have been underrepresented and excluded from their conversations and decisions that have shaped the past and present at Marquette. For students of color, first-generation students, low-income students, and LGBTQ+ students, Marquette hasn't been the home that it can be. As we've listened to more students, we've learned about the experiences and the stories that have shaped so many students' time at Marquette. One thing is that we've realized is that Marquette works better when we work together. When we listen and learn from each student's story, we can create a better campus for everyone.
Sarah and I decided that we wanted our slogan to be, "Let's get started together." For this slogan, for Sarah and I, it means that we're getting started with students not just in MUSG, but we're getting started with students across campus. MUSG does a lot of good work inside of our organization, but we don't end up reaching outside of our organization. We end up working for students, but not with students. That's the together part of our slogan. In terms of let's get started, Sarah and I want to recognize that our work in MUSG is continuous. It's not going to take a year, it's not going to take 3 years, it's not going to take 4 years. For some of the work that we want to do on campus, it's going to take a long time. But for Sarah and I, we want to be able to lay the groundwork so that future students can get started doing a lot more. This is at the core of what Sarah and I believe.
Thank you so much. All right, we will move on to Peter and Faiza for your opening statement.
Thank you, Sydney. I am a Milwaukee native. I was born here in 1997 at St. Luke's Medical Hospital, and I love this city. There is so much here that Marquette students should and can do and learn and experience, and a lot of what we want to do is trying to help students take advantage of that. I'm also a avid member of the Model United Nations Club on campus, and I'm a fourth-year student in the School of Engineering. And that kind of ties me into one of the first things that we want to do if you are so gracious as to elect us to be president and vice president. I want to promote the co-op program here at Marquette. Right now in the School of Engineering, students have the opportunity to go out, get internships, get experience in their field, get paid for it, and get college credits for it. I want there to be support and opportunities for all students at Marquette to be able to have that sort of experience. Similar to that, we also want to push advocacy for student employees here on campus. The people who are working on the university are those who are most likely to be less financially secure and need to be advocated for. Right now, we don't address the concerns of these students properly, and we need to push to recognize them by giving them higher wage and helping them out.
Hello again, my name is Faiza, and kind of just going off of what Peter says, I mean, one of our many points of interest also includes community development and outreach. As an educational opportunity program student, as a minority student, as a Muslim student, in the political climate that we're living in, we do feel like there's a lot of resources that are offered, but there's also a lot of resources that are lacking in the Marquette community, and we feel that as students we need to stand together because like everybody's saying, together we're stronger. And so that's why we're pushing for an intersectional outreach vice president.
Alrighty, well thank you both for your opening statements. Now we will move on to the questions. And just so you guys know, Peter and Faiza, we will start with you guys for this question. So, if elected as president and executive vice president, how does your ticket plan to ensure that the governing bodies of MUSG are representative of the many demographics and views present on Marquette's campus?
Do you want to start off?
Sure. So like I said, I mentioned the intersectional outreach vice president. So we have a current outreach vice president, and we've had all the time, but we feel that it's been lacking in terms of reaching out to marginalized students, and that includes students of minority backgrounds, students of faith backgrounds, students of different genders, LGBTQ, and low-income students. And so we feel that instead of just reaching out to specific organizations, it's also all about the individuals as well. We need to make sure that they have a voice in the office and that we are here to be connected with them, between them and the administration, and make sure that not one voice is unheard, because as students, we make up Marquette. We are the character of Marquette, and without us, Marquette isn't Marquette. So we're trying to make sure that not one voice, not one story is left untold.
Yeah, and building on that, we've been working with Dominique Maybank, who is the current chair of the Diversity, Equity, and Social Justice Committee in MUSG. And she's expressed the concerns, plenty of concerns with how MUSG has been not adequately addressing these issues of like outreaching to students and different marginalized groups on campus. And we want to make sure that there is someone in MUSG who is always committed to and always prioritizing these students. Because otherwise, as we've seen in the past, with so many other issues that come up, these students will be pushed off to the side and not addressed with the care that they deserve.
Yeah, and we've worked with students as well. I've worked with a lot of interfaith and a lot of multicultural, getting different organizations together and just talking about their experiences on campus and what they go through, and learning that they don't even know about the resources on campus, whether we have them or not. It's just basically hearing them out and telling them that yes, there's a voice here and we're here for you.
Great, thank you guys. All right, we will move the question on to Sarah and Dan.
Okay. So I think there are a couple of different ways that Sarah and I plan on including more groups in the work that MUSG does. So the first thing is that during our campaign, just in the past week, we've already been able to reach out to numerous groups. We've been to a couple of different meetings. So just the other day we were at the Betas, the Latinx fraternity on campus. And one thing that we've been noticing as we go around and we talk to more groups is that we're hearing the experiences and the stories that MUSG is missing and that we have been missing for quite some time now. I've been in MUSG since my freshman year on campus, And one thing that we do a really good job of is reaching about 5% of students on campus. We end up missing the other 95% of students on campus that have the experiences and the stories that actually matter, because those are where the resources aren't getting to. So one thing that Sarah and I really want to be able to do is to invite students into the conversations that we need to have at this university. So when we're going in to talk to Dr. Lovell, when we're going in to talk to the provost, we want to be able to bring students with us to the table so that we're actually elevating their voices and not just speaking for them. And then the second thing is closing the information and communication gap. There's a big gap between what Marquette knows, what the university knows, what MUSG knows, and what our student body knows. And one thing that MUSG can do a lot better at is making sure that students have the resources, the information that they need, whether that be regarding the student organization funding process or various other information that MUSG has that we're not able to get out to other students.
Yeah, and just going off of that, I think it's really important to recognize that MUSG isn't going to be the place for everyone to build their campus experience, right? So we can be as diverse and inclusive as possible, but some people are going to find genuine campus experiences in a home and other places. So something that I always tell Dan is that, like, you come to Marquette for superficial things like academics or whatever, but you stay at Marquette for the things like rowing or a club that you're really passionate about or a study abroad program. And that's really what we're about, is helping everyone find their place.
Great, thank you guys. We will move on to the next question. The Student Organization Funding Committee provides funding to student organizations, among other responsibilities, and the MUSG Executive Vice President serves as the chair of this committee and provides training to other members of the committee. So if elected as Executive Vice President and President of MUSG, how would you evaluate the current effectiveness of the system and its processes, and would you make any changes to the current system? And Sarah and Dan, we will start with you guys.
Yeah, so that's a good question. So it's the role of the Executive Vice President in MUSG to do student organization funding, just like Sydney said. And one problem that we've noticed just over the past year in being on executive board in MUSG and having the opportunity to work closely with our current Executive Vice President, Valerie Del Campo, is that that one role has a huge responsibility, and there's a lot of work in that one position. Just the other day when we were talking to the betas on campus, they brought up student org funding and mentioned that they didn't really feel like they had enough connection to the president and vice president. And one thing that Sarah and I want to do when we're in this role is first do more personal outreach to organizations. So we would be going to their monthly meetings. We wouldn't just be asking them to come in and meet with us. We wouldn't just be emailing them. We'd be doing personal outreach to them. The second thing, and something that we've talked about with a couple of other different clubs, is that we need to do some type of coalition where we invite student org leaders in and ask them what they think is wrong with the student org process, with the funding process, excuse me. And when we're able to do that, if we're able to bring them to the table and have a conversation with them, while also providing the institutional knowledge that we have of MUSG and showing that, yes, there are problems with our student org funding process, I think in the end, we're gonna have a better process. And we know that ultimately one of the things we need to do is increase our student organization funding. So certainly we wanna get more funds to students. But the other thing is that a big problem we've noticed right now on eBoard is that there are a lot of clubs that aren't applying for reimbursements. So after you apply for funding from MUSG, if you don't apply for the reimbursement, then you end up not actually getting the money that you applied for. So at the end of the day, there are bigger problems that we need to be able to solve, but we need to be able to invite those students into the conversation and stop just acting as if MUSG is the only one who can solve the problem.
Gotcha. Well, thank you guys. We will move on over to Peter and Faiza for the question.
Okay. Well, both Faiza and I have intimate experience with the student allocation funding. We have both started and been presidents of various student organizations on campus. We understand what it's like for student organizations to apply and to try to get the reimbursements. And we recognize that there is a lot that can be done to improve this process. One of the things that I've been a part of in the Senate is trying to create more transparency and try to make more accountability for the allocations process. And we want to keep pushing things like that as well. And Faiza, you want to continue?
Another thing that, I mean, as a president of a few different organizations, when I've been a part of the SOF application process, the student org process, whether it's spot funding or bulk funding, one thing that I feel like lacked is that sense of communication. It's the fact that when we are accepted or rejected or given partial of the amount that we applied for, is that we are not given clearly as to why that's the case. Why are decisions made? And we feel like that lack of transparency is what pushing student orgs away from reaching out to MUSG. It's the lack of clear-cut answers as to why things are happening and clear-cut solutions as to why things, or how to fix things and how to build a better relationship between them and MUSG in terms of funding and growing your own organization on campus.
All right, well, thank you both. We'll move on to the next question. So one of the responsibilities of the MUSG president is to appoint student representatives to all university committees. How would you go about selecting well-rounded students to represent the larger student body's interests when providing input at committee meetings? And Peter and Faiza, we will begin with you guys.
All right, thank you. First of all, we want to make sure that we're representing Marquette in a meaningful way. So we're going to need to make sure that we're getting all the different groups on campus, not just student organizations, but there's different age groups, different genders, the different ethnic and cultural groups that we want to reach out to. So we've been working hard with trying to work with the Multicultural Student Council. We want to be able to discuss with them and be able to get large pools of people to find the most representative students on campus to fill these roles. That way we're hearing the concerns of students, we're hearing the actual voices that are otherwise being lost right now.
And it's also making them aware that they do have a chance to give their voice. It's also telling them that, we're not going to wait for someone to give us the opportunity to speak. We're going to take it. And that's really the goal for us, as if we were to take office. Our goal is to be like, we're not going to wait for opportunities, we're going to create them. No matter what, we'll find a door to open. And that's the point, and that's the point of us reaching out to these different organizations, is telling them that, yes, you can be a representative on Senate. Yes, there are MUSG positions open. I feel like there's not a lot of advocacy as to, like, yes, any student can really apply for these positions and take part and take charge and be a representative for their group. So we find that very, very important.
Thank you, guys. We will move on to Sarah and Dan for the question.
Yeah, so I think an important role of the president in appointing students to specifically university committees is intentional outreach to underrepresented communities and being very proactive in doing so. And it isn't always just sending an email to different groups on campus. It's also going to their spaces and being like, hey, these are the opportunities we have, and this is what you can be doing, and I can show you how to make the most of this experience, and I can lead you through that process, and I'm always here for you to lean on if you need help with anything. And I think that's kind of the most important part about it, is you have to put yourself out there and lean into that uncomfy of, okay, I know I can get representatives from Senate, but let's take it one step farther and let's try to get more people on campus involved in these things. And I think that's kind of my main focus, is to do a lot more intentional, repetitive outreach to certain communities on campus that don't typically have a seat at the table. Do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think another big thing is, although this is a very outward-facing thing, I think it's also about our internal culture in MUSG. In my 3 years, there's been a lot of contentious problems in MUSG, and I think one thing is that this year we've had a really good culture, and it's been inviting and welcoming, and we need to continue to build on that. It's obviously not the perfect organization that we would want it to be, but changing a culture is a process, and it's not going to happen overnight. And one thing that Sarah and I want to be able to do is to make MUSG as welcoming as possible, and to be intentional about doing that, and not just pretend that that's going to happen overnight.
Great, thank you, guys. We will move on to the next question. At this year's President's Panel on Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, several Marquette student panelists shared instances when they experienced racism and microaggressions on Marquette's campus. As President and Executive Vice President, what steps would you take to educate students and ensure that these instances are not tolerated? So Sarah and Dan, we will start with you guys.
Yeah. So I think one good thing that came out of the President's Panel was that we did get to hear those students' experiences. But I think one thing that we've heard, at least I've personally heard from multiple students after the panel, especially a couple who attended it, was that although it was good to hear those students' experiences, they didn't feel as though the panel overall was as productive as it could have been. And this is something that as MUSG we constantly hear, which is that it's great to have panels, it's great to have forums, but first and foremost, we need to be very intentional about the processes and the policies that we use, and to make sure that those processes and those policies are avoiding as much discrimination and as much bias as possible. One thing we've done in MUSG most recently is to include implicit bias in our student organization funding process. And one thing that we're trying to do right now is to make sure that we institutionalize that so that all of MUSG has to go through implicit bias training. And then I think the second thing is just continuing to be intentional about finding those voices and those experiences and knowing that those experiences happen on this campus, and we need to make sure that more students are aware of that.
Great, thank you guys. We will move on to Peter and Faiza.
I love how Marquette does. They provide a lot of resources for minority students to share their experiences, but I do feel like it is lacking. And as a minority student, I personally feel like there's a lot that we can do. I was actually, before the panel, I was actually at a dinner kind of meeting with Lovell and like 6 other student organizations of multicultural and interfaith student leaders, and they talked about their experiences and the experiences that their members were having, and I wish we were able to bring everybody to the table, but and out of that I learned that there's a lot of stories that people are too shy to say. They feel that they're outnumbered, they feel that no one can relate to them. That's also one of the reasons why, I don't know if you've heard of the I Am to MU movie that came out, the documentary that came out. I participated in that as well, and through that experience I got to meet so many different people and hear their stories and realize I'm not the only one going through this. And being able to have this personal experience, I feel like I can relate to the students that were to come to me as executive vice president and be like, I'm here to help you because I understand 100% what you're going through, and I want to, the same way I didn't want to go through these struggles, I don't want you to go through these struggles as well. And that's why we're also pushing for the IOVP, the Intersectional Outreach Vice President. You want to talk a little bit more?
Yeah, we want to make sure that they're, like, in the past, the outreach and various parts of student government have a lot of different responsibilities, and for too long, like, these issues have kind of gone by the wayside and haven't been adequately addressed. So we want to make sure that there is someone who is immersed in these communities, who understands their struggles and their challenges, and is able to be constantly and consistently identifying, addressing, and advocating for all these students. And we also need to make sure that we're always standing with these students and against this racism.
Awesome, thank you very much. We will move on to the next question. Marquette recently hired a new Title IX coordinator who oversees investigations into sex-based discrimination, including sexual assault and sexual harassment. What steps would you take to increase dialogue about these issues? And how would you go about increasing awareness among Marquette students, staff, and faculty about the resources available on campus? And Peter and Faiza, we will begin with you.
All right. Well, first of all, we need to make sure that we're always supporting and believing victims. We need to make sure that everyone feels like they know what resources are available to them, and that they should feel empowered to be able to use them should they so choose. We can't just ignore these issues. We have to actually go out and make sure that we're actually addressing. Furthermore, I want to make sure that we're, as president and executive vice president, we want to be able to set a time every single week and make sure that that we are able to sit down with students and be able to make sure that we can hear these voices, and we want to always be reaching out to students to make sure that we have we're able to hear everyone.
Yeah, we want to make sure the awareness is there as well. I mean, it's one thing to have seminars and training and force people to come, but to make sure that these trainings are up to par for what the students want to see. I mean, the students are the ones who are going to be going through these things. And we also want to make sure that not only will we learn about the types of things that happen, but how to deal with certain situations as if you were a third party in a situation. We want to train people how to deal with, I mean, this also ties into our mental health platform as well, but how to deal with certain issues that you're facing, and like if your friend is going through something, how you can help them. That's one thing. And the second thing is that I've noticed there's a few incidences that's happened at Marquette's campus that, yes, Marquette University by itself would send that text message or something, but never have I really seen an MUSG statement as to as a fellow student, I'd like to wish you all safety. I'd like to wish you all, let you know, inform you as to what's happening on campus. As for example, the little incident that happened with the whole, I don't know, people were being snatched off the street. Whether it was true or not, there was a few days where people did believe that it was true, and there was a few days where people were so scared to walk outside alone. And I wish that MUSG had put out that communication to warn people about that.
Thank you very much. All right, we'll move on over to Sarah and Dan.
Yeah, so before I began, I just wanted to say that For all of the survivors in the audience and for those of you watching, we see you, we hear you, and we'll do everything we can to support each and every one of you who've experienced this. And kind of going back to the question, I think a big part of it is an information gap that we talked about, but it's also like keeping up to it and like being continuous in the process of education and doing trainings and workshops that are in spaces where students are present. So not just having them be at freshman orientation or having it be something that's done online, but doing it freshman year in the dorms, sophomore year in the dorms, junior and senior year, continuing to have those opportunities that are visible and compliant to like what the student needs.
Yeah, I think the second thing, and something that MUSG has done in the past, is 2 years ago we worked on a sexual assault and violence prevention forum, and we went ahead with the forum. It didn't have great attendance, but it was also the first time that MUSG had put any resources behind this issue. And it's the first time that MUSG had really shown a big interest in it. And it's something that I was proud to have worked on, but that I think moving forward, we need to figure out more concrete ways to ensure that we're supporting survivors and that we're supporting students. And I think one of those ways is the Callisto app. It's one thing that we've talked about in Student Senate this year. It's an app that other universities use, and I think it's just one idea that we should at least bring to the administration and force the university to have a conversation about. But I think overall, a big part of this is continuous training, continuous conversations, and from MUSG's part, continuous advocacy to let the university know that this is something that all students care about.
All right, thank you, Sarah and Dan. We'll move on to the next question. The accessibility of Hellfire Theater for students, staff, faculty, and patrons with disabilities has been an ongoing issue. The 4-story building does not have an elevator, nor does it have bathroom doors wide enough to accommodate wheelchairs. What steps would you take as president and executive vice president to address concerns about the accessibility of university facilities? We will start with Sarah and Dan.
So that's a really good question. It's something that Sarah and I actually just talked about today. This morning we were in the AMU and we were doing campus cleanup, and we noticed that when you use the button to open the doors, only one of the doors opens for most of the AMU entrances automatically. So that's just something that you see all around campus. This is something that we've heard from other students too, is that there's a lot of buildings where if you're somebody that can't access those buildings easily, there's not really anybody that you can go and talk to for that. And a lot of students are lost as to who are we supposed to talk to. I think this is an issue that MUSG could easily take up. I think this is where MUSG could come and advocate with students, bring them to the table, and figure out, okay, where are the parts on campus where Marquette is not accessible? Where are the parts on campus that Marquette needs to do better at institutionalizing in its facilities and its planning processes that all of our buildings are accessible to all of our students? So I think from our end, this is something that would be easy to bring to Dr. Lovell and to say, this is something students have noticed, this is something students care about, and it's something that we want you to be able to address with students.
Great, thank you guys. We'll move on over to Peter and Faiza.
Well, first of all, we need to make sure that we're, in order for everyone to be able to have the best experience they can at Marquette, we need to improve accessibility everywhere. Make sure that people are able to get into all of their classes, to all of their events. And when it comes to health fair specifically, we want to be able to come up with a specific plan for widening those doors and getting accessible ways to go between the floors. And one way we can do that is there are many different, in the College of Engineering, there are various senior design projects, and we want to be able to work with students and be able to to have some of the civil design or civil engineering students be able to work on this, so we're able to get student engagement and get excited about it, and then be able to have design propositions for president level and for the university at large, so that we're able to find a way to move forward with this and actually improve these very solvable issues.
And one way we plan to tackle that is that in order to know what the problem is, you need to ask them. Without their questions, without their concerns, we wouldn't know. And so therefore we plan on reaching out personally to students and asking them as to what do they need, what do they find necessary to help them find success here at Marquette. Simple as that.
Thank you guys very much.
Yeah.
All right, on to our next question. 50 Muslim people were killed and 50 more were injured in the Christchurch mosque shooting in New Zealand last Friday. Marquette's Muslim Student Association held a prayer vigil in the Alumni Memorial Union to honor the victims. Do you believe that events like this one are important for the campus community? And how will you make an effort to be an active member of the campus community? And Peter and Faiza, we will begin with you guys.
Thank you. Actually, funny enough, I'm the current president of the Muslim Student Association. So my team and I were actually were the group that actually put the whole vigil together, and I was so honored to be a part of it, and I was so blessed to see that the Marquette community came together and supported their Muslim brothers and sisters, because it wasn't just a Muslim issue, it was a humanitarian issue. And I know that a lot of people lost sleep on this problem, but not just this problem, the problem that's been happening all over the world to many different groups simply because of ignorant hate against people who are different than they are. And I feel like things like this are very important. It's very important that we come together. It's obvious. We don't have to say that we have to come together. We don't have to say that we stand with each other. I think the more important thing is that the only times we come together shouldn't be in times of crisis. It shouldn't be in times where people are getting killed, and learning these lessons shouldn't be at the expense of innocent lives. Yes, this was an opportunity for us to learn about one another, but I think that things like this should be continued throughout the year. It should be continued between MUSG, not just MUSG, but amongst the community at Marquette, just between individuals and different groups, just learning about one another and building relationships, starting those dialogues, whether it was interfaith, whether it's learning about different cultures, traditions, different beliefs. It's just holding that conversation, not just at one day or after one crisis.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the best way to stop hate from spreading is to help students learn and love each other. FASA specifically has helped to start the interfaith coordination organization on campus, and we want to push to have students experience each other. Go to Friday prayer with MSA. Go to the CIE, the Center for Intercultural Exchange, and be able to meet students who aren't like yourself, or be able to go into other spaces that you have never been to before. We want students to be able to learn about each other and love each other.
Thank you both. All right, we'll move on over to Sarah and Dan.
Yeah, so first I wanted to say thank you to FASA for organizing that vigil. I'm also a Muslim student, and I grappled a really long time with processing the whole incident in New Zealand, and I really appreciate that, so thank you. And I think going back to providing opportunities like this and engaging in the campus community, it's kind of at the root of who we're supposed to be, right? It's Marquette is a university that advertises to be persons for and with each other, so it's really important to be there with people during times like this and also be there for them during times like this. So increasing opportunities not only in MUSG to do that, but also pushing for institutional support in doing this. And I know MUSG has not done a very good job in being there for and with students, so I hope this next year me and Dan are able to do that.
Great, thank you guys. We'll move on to our next question. What do you think is missing in the opposing tickets platform, and how does your tickets platform compensate for that gap? So we will start this time with Sarah and Dan.
So I think one thing to note is, first off, that our platform and our other tickets platform are both coming from our experiences and our stories on campus. And that's one thing that Sarah and I have been really intentional about saying to student orgs when we've been talking to them, is that our platform is not complete. It's not the best, the absolute best that it could be, but that's because we haven't heard all the stories and all the experiences on campus that we need to hear. And that's one thing that we've been intentional about saying. So the first thing that I will say is that I think one thing that our platform has that I don't think the other tickets platform has is that as we've been going around and we've been listening to more students, the one thing we've been hearing a lot about is that we want to be empowered, not to have MUSG do work for us, but instead to have MUSG come to more of our meetings, to have MUSG continuously ask us, what do we actually need on campus? And most importantly, to do that for the student groups on campus and the communities that are underrepresented and underserved right now. And I think one way that you see that represented in our platform is the fact that we're going around and we're talking to student groups about our platform. We're talking about our experiences and we're asking them about theirs. And I think that's one thing that might be missing from the other tickets platform.
Thank you, Sarah and Dan. We will move on over to Peter and FASA.
Sure. I agree and disagree with the statement made on our platform. Actually, we have been reaching out to different organizations, for example, DESJA, the Department for
the Diversity, Equity, and Social Justice Committee.
and we've been working with them a lot. We've been working with different organizations, but not just during our campaign. I think in the past 4 years that I've been here, I don't think I've wasted any time not learning about different experiences on campus. Although I wasn't a student leader on MUSG, I was a student leader on the ground with these student organizations. I've worked shoulder to shoulder with these organizations and heard their experiences, and I'm learning their experiences, and all of these experiences and all of this knowledge that I've gained is the motivation that I have for why I'm running for executive vice president along with Peter. And that's the reason why I want to be not their voice. I don't want to govern them. I want them to govern me because, we're the Marquette student government, not the government of the students.
Another way we want these voices to have a constant presence in MUSG is with the intersectional outreach vice president position that we are working to create with Destra. We want to be able to have these organizations have the input on who this person is and have them immersed in the struggles and the challenges that they face. And this is going to empower them to have a role and a voice in the student government, and we're going to do everything in our power to support them and to support this role. And it's you can't just reach out to organizations for 3 weeks before election. Rather, you need to be constantly engaged with these communities your entire tenure here.
You need to kind of walk in their shoes before you can learn their story. It's one thing to walk into the middle of a chapter of somebody's life, but it's another thing to really fully understand what they're going through and really fully appreciate them for the struggles that they're facing. And I think that's something that a lot of people, don't realize is happening.
Gotcha. Thank you guys very much. We will move on to our next question. Tuition has been on the rise for years, causing concern among students, especially those from low-income backgrounds. For the 2019-20 academic school year, the Board of Trustees approved a tuition increase of more than $2,000. What would you do to address the tuition increases with university officials and empower the concerns of students? So Peter and Faiza, we will begin with you two.
Obviously, tuition increases affect everyone, but the people that they hurt the most are low-income students. And one of the things that is a program that Marquette currently has that doesn't get enough attention is the emergency fund. There is a resource for students who are in financial crisis, whether that means you are unable to pay for your books or unable to cover your rent for a month. You can reach out to Jackie Black, who is the assistant coordinator for Hispanic initiatives, and you're able to get aid when you need it. And I'm actually working with her to develop a similar program for MUSG to model so that low-income students on campus who want to participate in student activities and events but are unable to do so because of financial reasons, we want to be able to have a fund for them so that they are able to have the real Marquette experience, be able to follow the Cura Personalis and kind of develop their whole person.
Yeah, I'm also a part of the Educational Opportunity Program. For those who don't know, it's a program for minority and low-income students who need help financially to get into Marquette. And it's like a scholarship program, kind of, or a grant program, whatever you want to call it. And basically, they help students pay for school and also help them they get extra counselors and tutors. It's a very amazing program, and it's a program that's very underrated here at Marquette, and a program that definitely needs to be advocated for, and a program that I really think that a lot of students don't know about and should. As an EOP student myself, I'm blessed to have been a part of this organization because I've met not only so many people, but I've also been blessed with their help and their time. So we want to have more programs like that on campus, and I also want to sit down with administration and question them as they're raising this tuition, what are they doing? Are they keeping in mind the students who need this financial help? Are they keeping in mind the gaps between the financial aid, the scholarships, and the tuition increase? Are they keeping those students in mind?
Thank you guys very much. We'll move on over to Sarah and Dan.
Yeah, so the first thing that we'll say is that it's important to be honest and transparent as MUSG when we talk about tuition. The first thing is that MUSG is not going to be able to get a tuition freeze. We're not going to be able to get tuition to go down. That's something that MUSG in the past has said we might try to change tuition modeling. In the end, that's just something that is an institutional problem for higher ed, but not something that MUSG can change. But something that Sarah and I have noticed that a lot of students seem to want is to at least have some information, some communication from the university about where is our money going when tuition goes up. So the first thing one of the things we put in our platform is to advocate for a 4-year personalized tuition plan for students. Essentially what that would do is allow students to know, okay, over a period of 4 or 5 years, I'm going to pay X amount of dollars total even if you're not entirely sure if it's going to be down to that number, you can have some range. As opposed to right now where students come in freshman year and they don't get to hear anything about what they're going to pay sophomore, junior, or senior year. I think the second thing in terms of closing that communication and information gap is looking at financial literacy training, especially for low-income and first-gen students who might not necessarily have had those resources in high school. I think that's something that MUSG can easily advocate for in the university, to say that you need to do a better job of preparing students before they come in freshman year and keeping up with them over their 4 years while they're here.
Great, thank you guys very much. All right, we'll move on to our next question. Marquette has recently made sustainability efforts on campus, including phasing out plastic straws at on-campus dining locations. What other sustainability efforts would you like to see on campus, and what action would you take to see these ideas happen? So Sarah and Dan, we will start with you guys.
Yeah, so one thing that we actually just did this morning that I mentioned briefly was Campus Cleanup. It was an event that was put on by Students for Environmentally Active Campus, SEEK. And this was actually the biggest campus cleanup that we've had in a long time, and at least in my 3 years here. One thing that our platform wants to do, and one thing that we want to do, is to be able to support those events more as MUSG. In the past, when MUSG has held those events and done them ourselves, it hasn't been a great attendance. But when we've switched those events to be able to support student orgs having them, we've gotten a lot more students out to them. So one thing is to just be more intentional about the organizations that we're supporting. The second thing that we note on our website and in our platform is that we want to fully support the Office of Sustainability at Marquette. Right now it's run by one man, Brent Ribble. He doesn't have a budget and he doesn't often have a seat at the decision-making table. And that's something that Sarah and I know that we can change, is to go to the university and say there are a lot of students that care about sustainability, and we want to be able to advocate for a budget for Brent and to make sure that he has a seat at the decision-making table. And I think if we're able to do that, we're going to very, very slowly, but hopefully a little bit, progress our sustainability efforts at Marquette.
Thank you guys very much. All right, we'll move on over to Peter and Faiza.
Thank you. Again, we also want to push for Brent Ribble and the Sustainability Office to be able to have a budget. But beyond that, something that a lot of people don't know right now is that the world of recycling and sustainability is rapidly changing. Due to changing international relations and market tensions, such as Operation National Sword in China right now, a lot of what used to be recyclable here in America no longer is. And sometimes if it was before, it has to be specially processed. And we want a large part of our platform actually is getting Marquette ready for this new future of sustainability, so that we want to have like bottle drives where we are cleaning bottles in the right way and make sure that we are filling out or using composting on our campus, and not just in our dining halls, but also for the off-campus students. We've been both working with Senator Meredith Nee to develop programs and initiatives to help prepare Marquette for this changing scene, and we're really excited to keep going there.
Yeah, one initiative we really want to take is getting students involved in the process. So not just us being like, oh, here's a new way that we're going to start recycling, but more of like, how do you want to do it? So we were thinking of working with, for those who don't know, in the engineering and most of the STEM, there's senior design, and they have to kind of work together in a group and design something that is like, depending on what they want to design. So we were thinking of starting a project and having it like funded, so that students can design something that they think would help increase the amount of like recycled bottles that we get, or just to motivate students to do it. And we think that if it's student run, then people will be more motivated to participate in it.
Great, thank you guys. Thank you candidates for your responses. Now we will move on to the audience question portion of our debate. So audience members, if you would like to ask a question, please come up to the microphone, introduce yourself, and ask your question to one or both of the tickets.
Hi, I'm Matt Martinez. I'm the Executive Projects Editor here at The Wire. My question's for Peter and Faiza. I'm wondering kind of how you plan on implementing more co-op opportunities for majors outside of STEM. I know you had mentioned it in your opening statement, and I'm just wondering logistically how you're thinking about doing that and how that would factor into, you know, some of the things that companies are offering right now.
All right, thank you for that question, Matt. Right now, a lot of different colleges already have a basic infrastructure that we can keep using and developing here. The main thing that is going to be different moving forward is like a lot of different majors and students are able to get internship opportunities, but they're not necessarily like directly in their field or the way they're not necessarily representative of what you're going to be doing after graduation. And also the kind of most direct thing that we can be pushing on is that you won't necessarily get college credits for them. So we want to be advocating for more support for students in these areas. We want to have a dedicated personnel developing these relationships with companies, keeping track of how they go. So we have there's the Office of Industry Relations in the School of Engineering, where we have lists and we have contacts with companies all across the country and Milwaukee. And we want to have similar stuff like that so everyone is getting the support they need.
Yeah, and this is not impossible. Many other schools around the United States actually already implement co-ops or co-op programs in their many different, many different majors. So we plan on reaching out to these universities and kind of modeling what they have and building a partnership with them and, getting their advice as to how they started and where we could go with it.
Awesome. Thank you.
Hello. Hello, I'm Thomas Rice. I'm currently running for Academic Senate, and I wanted to ask, in the current Senate situation, nobody is running with any opposition in any of the schools currently for this set of elections. I think it's kind of emblematic that MUSG has had issues with engaging not only marginalized communities, but the Marquette community as a whole. I mean, it's disappointing as someone who's running to have nobody to discuss on-campus issues with really within my own school. And this lack of dialogue stagnates Senate and prevents new voices from being heard in the halls of MUSG. Concerned students can still come in and voice their concerns, but when we don't have legislators of different backgrounds and of new ideas, we really stagnate as an institution. How do you think we can better engage the wider community to address these issues?
All right, we can start with Sarah and Dan this time, and then we'll move on over to Peter and Faiza.
Yeah. Thanks, Tommy. That's a good question. In my role in MUSG right now, I'm the legislative vice president, so I oversee our student senate. And one thing that has been not just emblematic of MUSG this year, but in the past too, is the fact that we have a really tough time at getting people to run for MUSG Senate. I think in the past 3 years, it has been more or less how it is this year, in the sense that there are always students running unopposed. And one thing that we've heard, one thing that was actually mentioned when we were talking with the betas the other night, was that they didn't even know that there was an MUSG Senate. So one of the first things that we intend to work on if we're in office next year is MUSG, the communication gap between MUSG and the student body. And I think one of the most important ways we can do that is by having the president and vice president and potentially the legislative vice president actually go out and talk to at least the executive boards of student orgs and say, okay, here's the different positions that are open, here's how MUSG works. And then I think the second thing is being intentional about which communities we're inviting into the conversation. MUSG has historically, and especially MUSG Senate, has historically been a white and male institution. And it's something that we recognize and that Meredith and Val, our current president and vice president, have done a good job of trying to change. But again, changing that culture is really difficult. And I think it's a process that we need to continue to work on. And I think it's something that Sarah and I have noticed and we'll be able to work on with our experience.
Thank you very much, Dan.
Thank you both. We'll move on over to Peter and Faiza.
Thank you. In addition to those sentiments that Dan was talking about, we also want to make sure that MUSG as a whole, and Senate specifically to address your concern, Tommy, feels like a welcoming place for people to come in. Currently, I do my best to try to make sure everyone feels welcome and is heard. However, a lot of the structure and a lot of the way that the chair of the meetings will operate can tend to try to silence voices or try to dominate the discussion. So where Senate should normally be able to discuss different issues, you'll have different people who are not even senators or who are not even necessarily germane to the topic kind of butting in and dominating conversations, which really should be for the Senate. As well as we also want to be pushing out so that students know that there is a concerned students forum at the beginning of every single Senate meeting. We want students to know that they can reach out to Senate, and we're going to be doing this by reaching out to student organizations. We want to, right now we're trying to meet with a lot of student organizations because of the campaign, but we aren't going to be stopping doing that after this week, whether we lose or win. We're going to be trying to reach out to student organizations, helping them understand what MUSG does, how it works, and how they can get involved. Do you want to add anything?
Thank you both. I look forward to working with both of you.
Thanks, Tom.
Hi, so my name is Mustafa Boumalou. So I've been a board member for a few of the cultural organizations on campus. I've been involved in the student org bulk and spot funding processes, and I've seen how long and tedious they can be. I know you guys made some comments on this earlier. I just sort of want to learn about more specifics of what your platforms are. What more can be done to clarify application decisions, such as why student orgs were either rejected or requests were only partially fulfilled, so that student organization leaders can know what they need to do better next time to receive more of that funding and how they can actually build a platform of what they can do?
Thank you. All right, we'll start with Peter and Faiza this time.
Thank you, Mustafa. Really what I want to start with is that transparency is key. As a student org leader, I've also faced the same struggles, and I've seen the process, and I've seen how confusing it can be. I don't disagree with the fact that you need all this information. I don't disagree with the fact that all the things that they're asking for is important. What I do disagree with is the fact that there's a lack of information, and I see that, and it's frustrating, and I personally have been through this struggle. So what I want to see being done, especially as executive vice president and somebody who would be personally looking over the bulk funding and spot funding applications, I want to make sure that student org leaders know exactly why decisions are being made and how they're being made. I want them to know every single detail because this concerns them. This is still their tuition money at the end. So
Yeah.
that's our goal.
And building off of that, even last semester when we were voting on bulk funding applications in the Senate, there was a lot of issues where the rationales that were being sent out with the allocations were not really satisfactory, and due to, as kind of the concern of the previous question asker was, 1 week we got the information to vote on a few weeks late, and then the first week we had it, we didn't have quorum, so we weren't even able to vote on it. So by the time we were actually able to look at it and debate it, there was a lot of confusion, and a lot of the people in power weren't necessarily giving us the information we needed to adequately address this. So that's why I've been working so hard this last semester to try to improve that transparency. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll move on over to you, Sarah and Dan. And just so you know, we're running a little short on time, so I lessened the time to 1 minute and 40 seconds, but you can go ahead and answer.
Okay. So yeah, I think that's a really good question, Mustafa. First thing I'll mention is the information gap. We were at Club Rowing on Friday, and one thing that they mentioned to us constantly was that although they had one person who knew student org funding really well in the organization, it ends up only being one person, and after 4 years, with turnover rates in student orgs, that one person doesn't pass that knowledge along, and then you have to start that process all over again. It's something that pretty much every student org has had to face, which is that only one person knows the process. So one thing that we want to do, one thing that I mentioned before, is more intentional outreach as president and vice president to actually go to the student org meetings and explain those processes to them. I think the second thing, and one thing that I want to recognize, is our current executive vice president, Valerie Del Campo, has done a very good job in the position. And I want to say that the problem with the position is that there's a lot to do in that one position. You're not only expected to do student org funding, but you're also expected to take care of the responsibilities that you have with your platform. So one thing that Sarah and I have discussed is potentially adding another position under the executive vice president that would allow that individual to not only work on student org funding and meet more closely with student organizations, but to also be able to have more responsibility for taking care of their platform. And I think if we're able to do that, if we're able to add a person to this mix so that the responsibilities aren't on one person who has academics, MUSG, work, all the other responsibilities that students have, then we're going to be able to split up the roles a little bit more and make it a lot easier to meet with students one-on-one and share that information with them.
Great, thank you guys very much. And that actually wraps up our audience questions segment of the debate. So now we will move on to our closing statements. And Sarah and Dan, since you guys started with opening statements, we'll allow Peter and Faiza to begin with closing statements. You will have 2 minutes as usual, so you guys can go ahead and get started.
So I think at the core of our entire platform is that we want to be actively identifying, addressing, and advocating for issues important to students. We're going to be doing that by promoting employment opportunities and employing with our co-op program, as well as with the improvement of student wages on campus. We're going to be trying to be pushing for better support for mental health students by trying to specifically update referrals in the counseling department and getting mental health training for MUPD. Additionally, we want to be pushing for our intersectional outreach vice president, and Faiza can go on.
Yeah, we really want to develop the community and outreach development here at MUSG and at Marquette as a whole. And we want to build that relationship with the students, not just student orgs, but individuals, and hear their personal experiences, and also not just reach out to them once, but continue that relationship and build on that. You know, for years to come, these people are going to be your coworkers, your neighbors, your friends. You know, you need to keep that relationship built. We're still a family here at Marquette. We want to build that family aspect here in everything, whether it's recycling, sustainability, because Marquette is our second home, or even just job opportunities. We just want to sit here and encourage one another. Another thing that we want to push for is women in STEM. That's something that's also very underrated here. I feel as a woman in STEM myself that we really want to encourage women to have more resources and more organizations and have more MUSG kind of coordinated opportunities and programs to help them find different scholarships or just kind of be there for one another, learn about classes that they could take together. I think that's
Great. Thank you guys very much. We'll move on over to Sarah and Dan for your closing statements.
So first, I just want to say thank you to MUTV and to The Wire. I think this debate has gone really well, so thank you for that. One thing that Sarah and I, as we've been thinking about for the past few months even, what we want to do in MUSG in the future, one thing that we've been constantly thinking about is what are we missing along the way. Sarah and I met last August. That was the first time that we met in MUSG, and kind of immediately we had a lot of the same sentiments about campus, and a lot of them were that Marquette could be doing so much more that it's not doing right now, and MUSG could be doing so much more that we're not doing right now. And I think the most important part when you think about this election is to think about, at the end of the day, who do you know that's going to come at this with heart, with passion, and with the experience to be able to do this job. And I know that there's nobody that I would be happier to win with, lose with, succeed with, or fail with than Sarah. And we want to be able to do that with students, to succeed with them, to fail with them, to do everything with them.
Yeah, so when Dan and I started, thank you for that. So we're asking you also vote for us, hopefully, but we're also asking you to think about what type of leadership you want from your student government, and not just for next year, but for years to come. This is going to be a foundation for what's happening. And Dan and I think there are two parts to leadership. The first is having that passion and heart he talked about to lead, and like to find the voices and experiences and the stories that are being missed, and elevating these stories and amplifying these voices. But they also have to have the experience and the knowledge, and I think Dan and I have the experience and knowledge to do that, and we have the resources to carry those voices to the table and do it with us. And I think without that second part of leadership, without being able to do that, we end up disappointing ourselves, and we end up disappointing the people we serve. So with that, let's get started together.
Great. Thank you guys for coming today. Thank you for being here. We really appreciate it. And thank you, audience members, for your participation in the debate. That wraps up our 2019 MUSG Presidential and Executive Vice Presidential Debate. Thank you so much for joining us, and make sure to vote this Thursday, March 28th. Have a great night.